An ex-sniper bought a remote mountain. When poachers crossed his fence, they never returned. He had lived in shadows, hiding behind rocks, trees, and sometimes walls of enemy territory. He had fired shots that saved lives, and he had fired shots that ended them. Every target, every mission, every close call had left marks on him that no metal could erase. Now he wanted silence, pure, unbroken silence. He wanted a place where no one could call his phone, where no one could demand his time or attention. A place where the only life he would have to worry about was the life of the mountain itself. So he bought one. Not a house in the suburbs, not a condo overlooking a city skyline. He bought a remote mountain, a vast stretch of wilderness that rose above civilization like a giant sentinel. It was covered in pine trees and craggy rocks, streams that twisted like silver snakes, and cliffs that dropped sharply into valleys below. Few people had ever seen the top, and even fewer dared to go there. Ethan arrived on a crisp autumn morning. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Mist clung to the slopes like a delicate veil, and the first rays of sunlight painted the mountain in gold and green. He stepped out of his old, sturdy Jeep and took a deep breath. This was his sanctuary. His first task was to understand the land. Ethan spent days walking every inch of the property. He mapped the streams, identified animal trails, and noted vantage points that could serve as watch posts. Even in retirement, he worked like he was still in the field. He observed with patience, learning the rhythm of the mountain as if it were an enemy he had to read before engaging. He built a cabin, not large but strong. It was made of logs he had cut himself, reinforced with stone and steel. The cabin sat on a ledge overlooking the main valley, giving a wide view of any approaching threat. From the top of the mountain he could see for miles, and he wanted it that way. Next came the fence, not a simple wire fence. Ethan's fence was clever, nearly invisible from a distance but strong enough to stop anyone who didn't belong. He used motion sensors, hidden cameras, and even quiet alarm systems that could alert him no matter where he was on the mountain. Every post was strategically placed, every sensor calculated. Ethan's neighbors, if they could even be called that, were a rare sight. Occasionally, hikers would pass at the base of the mountain, and sometimes a local hunter would mention seeing strange shapes or hearing a distant whistle echoing from above. None of them knew about Ethan, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The first week was quiet. The only sounds were the wind, the occasional bird, and the rush of streams. Ethan began to feel something he had not felt in years: peace. He could sit for hours on the balcony of his cabin, rifle beside him, watching the world go by without interference. He planted seeds in a small garden, repaired parts of the cabin, and even started learning the calls of local birds. But the mountain had other life too. Deer grazed in the meadows, foxes prowled the underbrush, and eagles circled above. Ethan took pleasure in the small victories of life here. A fox catching a rabbit, a bird building its nest, the way the sunlight fell on a deer as it paused to drink from a stream. He protected these creatures with a quiet intensity. He had seen humans destroy much more than any sniper could, and he was determined that this mountain would remain untouched. Then, on a foggy morning about a month after he arrived, Ethan noticed something unusual. Tracks, human tracks. Not one or two, but several sets moving along the edge of his property. He crouched behind a tree, his eyes narrowing. The prints were fresh. Someone had crossed the fence. He did not panic. He had seen this before. Humans were curious creatures, sometimes too curious for their own good, and they often made mistakes. Ethan activated a small drone he had rigged to patrol the perimeter. Its camera gave him a clear view from above. A group of men, rough-looking and armed with rifles and knives, moved clumsily through the trees. They were poachers, Ethan realized instantly. They carried traps, nets, and containers that would hold the animals they intended to take. He did not move. He did not fire. He watched. Every step they took, every whisper they made was recorded in his mind. He remembered the training, the years spent calculating distance, wind, and timing. The mountain itself became an extension of him. Every rock, every tree, every shadow was part of his awareness. The poachers camped near a stream, setting traps and talking loudly about their next targets. "This mountain's got everything we need," one of them said. "Rare deer, maybe a bear, even birds worth selling." Ethan smiled faintly, though no one could see it. They had no idea what they were up against. To them, he was just an empty mountain, a wilderness with no owner. They had never encountered a human who treated the terrain itself as a weapon. He spent the night observing. The poachers made mistake after mistake. They split up, left traps unsupervised, and even laughed carelessly near animal paths. Every error was noted. Every weakness was recorded. By morning, Ethan began to act, but he did not use bullets first. His approach was subtle. Some of their traps were dismantled quietly, some were triggered to collapse harmlessly, and some paths were blocked. He wanted them to realize slowly that the mountain was alive and aware. Over the next week, the poachers tried repeatedly to capture animals. Each time they failed. Traps were empty, nets tangled, and supplies vanished mysteriously. Fear began to creep into their voices. One of them muttered, "Something's not right here. This place, it's watching us." Ethan did not need to confront them directly. The poachers were clever enough to sense the danger, but not clever enough to escape it. He had spent decades understanding human behavior under stress, and he applied it perfectly. The mountain itself became a reflection of his experience, a silent force that punished recklessness and rewarded caution. By the second week, the poachers were exhausted and frightened. They whispered about the ghost of the mountain, a man who could see without being seen, who could strike without a weapon. Ethan allowed the rumors to grow. Fear, he knew, was often more powerful than bullets. He moved silently through the forest, observing, guiding, and manipulating the terrain. A snapped branch here, a displaced rock there, small disturbances that unsettled the intruders. Their confidence faltered. Their group split, with some wanting to leave, others determined to press on. Ethan did not intervene yet. Let them make the mistakes themselves. By the third week, the poachers had begun disappearing. One vanished while trying to check a trap. Another was gone when returning from a water source. Their radios emitted strange static, and their calls for help went unanswered. Those who remained were terrified, whispering about traps that seemed impossible, about a man who was everywhere and nowhere at once. Ethan watched from his vantage points, calm and methodical. Every movement was deliberate. Every disappearance served a purpose. The mountain, once silent and peaceful, now hummed with a quiet tension, and Ethan, at the heart of it, was the invisible hand guiding events. By the end of the month, only a few poachers remained. They were desperate, scared, and utterly unprepared for what awaited them. Ethan felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he had known in years. This was not just about defending the mountain. This was about reclaiming control, about showing that human skill, patience, and intelligence could dominate even the most arrogant intruders. The mountain had become his domain, a place where life was protected and intruders faced consequences. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. Others might come, tempted by rumors of rare animals and untouched wilderness. But he was ready. He had returned to a world that often overlooked the quiet power of a human mind honed by decades of discipline. And he would prove that, even in retirement, he was a force to be reckoned with. And as he stood on the balcony of his cabin, watching the mist rise and fall over the peaks, Ethan Voss understood one simple truth. No one, not even the most reckless poacher, could ever truly outsmart a human in his element. The mountain had chosen its guardian, and he would not let it down. The mountain had settled into its usual rhythm. Birds sang at dawn, deer grazed in the meadows, and the wind whispered through the pines. Yet beneath this calm there was tension, Ethan could feel it. He had been on the mountain for over a month now, and the poachers had not given up. They were clever, persistent, and reckless all at once. But Ethan was ready. He spent early morning hours on the balcony of his cabin, binoculars in hand. Mist floated along the slopes, hiding shapes and shadows, and the crisp air carried scents of earth, pine, and something darker, human sweat and fear. Ethan's eyes scanned the ridges carefully. Any disturbance, any unusual movement would catch his attention. Through the drone's camera feed, he watched the intruders below. There were 3 remaining poachers, cautious now but still daring enough to move deeper into the forest. They carried heavy packs, and from the air their movements seemed clumsy and noisy despite their attempts at stealth. Ethan did not move. He did not even breathe heavily. Every part of his mind was alert. Years of training had taught him patience. He remembered countless nights spent waiting, sometimes for hours, for a target to reveal itself. This was no different. The mountain was his battlefield and the intruders were the targets, but he would let them make mistakes themselves. The poachers set up camp near a small stream, unaware that Ethan had already mapped the area in his mind. He knew every rock, every slope, and every hidden animal path. He watched them argue quietly as they set traps, their voices low but tense. "They're out of range," one of them said, shaking his head. "We can't get any deer near the ridge, too risky," another scoffed. "This place is too quiet, something's off, I don't like it." Ethan smiled faintly. That unease was exactly what he wanted. Fear, carefully planted, grew faster than any trap. For the next several days he observed them closely. They split their tasks. One set traps, another searched for water, and the third kept watch. But their coordination was weak. They did not understand the mountain. They did not respect it. They were humans trying to dominate a wilderness far older and smarter than themselves. Ethan began subtle interventions. He moved small stones onto their paths, shifted branches to create noise when they walked, and used his drone to create shadows that seemed to move in the forest. The poachers noticed these signs but could not explain them. Their confidence began to falter. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks, Ethan watched from a ridge. He could see the poachers checking a trap they had set near a small clearing. When they returned, the trap was empty. Confused, they looked around. One muttered, "Something's taking them, something big." Ethan shook his head silently, amused. Nothing big had taken the traps. Everything was exactly as it should be, intact, untouched. Only the poachers' minds were failing them. By the 3rd day, their frustration became evident. They moved quickly, speaking less and whispering more. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, made them jump. Ethan watched from a safe distance, tracking their every move on his tablet. He noted their weaknesses: fear, impatience, and overconfidence. He decided it was time to teach them a lesson in humility. Not through violence, but through cleverness. Ethan spent the night preparing. He adjusted the motion sensors along their paths, created false trails with broken branches, and even rigged small noise devices that mimicked animal sounds. He wanted the mountain itself to communicate that humans were not welcome here, that it had a guardian, and that intruders would face consequences in ways they could not predict. At dawn, he activated a small drone, letting it hover silently above the trees. The poachers noticed it immediately, confusion and fear etched on their faces. One raised a hand to wave it away, as if it were a bird. Ethan smiled behind his binoculars. This was exactly the reaction he had anticipated. They moved cautiously, trying to track the source of the drone. Their every step seemed deliberate now, but Ethan knew they would make mistakes. Humans always did. By midday, one poacher tried to cross a narrow ridge to check a trap. A carefully placed log, hidden beneath leaves, shifted under his weight, causing him to stumble and fall, safely but shaken. The others rushed to help him, panic rising in their voices. Ethan observed, his mind analyzing every detail. Their fear was spreading. They were no longer thinking clearly. Decisions became slower, movements became hesitant, and even the strongest among them began doubting the others. By evening, they huddled near a fire, whispering urgently. "We need to leave," one said. "This place, it's not right. Something's watching us." The others agreed, though reluctantly. They were not ready to admit the mountain was smarter than them, but fear was a strong teacher, and they were learning quickly. Ethan spent the night reinforcing his preparations. He created small diversions along the main paths, set quiet alarms that would alert him if they tried to sneak away, and even rigged harmless traps that would delay them. Every action was designed to teach a lesson. Humans are clever, yes, but the wilderness is cleverer, and in the hands of someone who understands it, unstoppable. Over the next week, the poachers tried to move through the mountain. Each attempt ended in confusion and frustration. One tried to cross a stream and found a path blocked by fallen branches that had not been there the day before. Another approached a trap only to find it tangled and unusable. The third kept wandering in circles, returning repeatedly to the same spot without realizing it. Ethan watched everything, calm and methodical. He did not need to fire a shot. Every mistake they made, every fear that took root, was a victory in itself. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, the poachers gathered near a ridge overlooking the valley. They were silent, exhausted, and frightened. The wind carried a low whistle, the sound of branches swaying, and the distant call of an eagle. For the first time they felt small, insignificant. "This mountain, it's alive," one whispered, eyes wide. Ethan shook his head again, quietly amused. Alive? No. The mountain was what it had always been. But in the hands of someone who understood it, it could feel alive to anyone who entered without respect. By the end of the week, the poachers' morale had collapsed. Their confidence shattered, their movements became sloppy, and their arguments grew tense. They could not comprehend the precision and patience that worked against them. They were good at hunting animals, yes, but humans. They had underestimated humans. And humans, when disciplined and clever, could turn the tables in ways no one expected. Ethan spent his days walking the mountain, checking his sensors, maintaining his traps, and observing the poachers from a distance. Each day, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had created a system where intelligence, patience, and strategy outmatched brute force. The poachers, exhausted and fearful, began to leave in small groups, one by one, each retreating in confusion and uncertainty. They would tell stories later, exaggerating the strange sounds, the sudden shadows, the ghost of the mountain who watched them. Ethan did not mind. Rumors were as powerful as any weapon. By the end of part 2, the mountain was quiet once more. The streams flowed, birds sang, and deer grazed peacefully. Ethan stood on his balcony looking over the peaks. He knew this was only the beginning. Others might try to test the mountain, tempted by its beauty and resources. But he was ready. He understood a truth most people ignored. Humans were not just creatures of instinct. When combined with patience, intelligence, and strategy, they could become guardians, protectors, and forces far stronger than brute strength alone. And Ethan Voss, the ex-sniper who had chosen a mountain as his sanctuary, was living proof. The mountain was his domain, and every intruder who dared cross it would learn that the human mind, when disciplined and skilled, could conquer fear, outsmart danger, and protect what mattered most. Silence returned to the peaks, but beneath it, a quiet vigilance remained. Ethan knew the mountain was alive in another way now, alive with the promise that no one would harm it without facing consequences. And he would be watching always. Ethan Voss woke before dawn, as he always did. The air was cool and fresh, and the mist curled around the peaks like silent ghosts. He stepped onto the balcony of his cabin, rifle at his side, but not for hunting. He had no intention of harming animals. Today he observed the mountain and its newest challenge. The poachers who had returned after the first failures, braver, or perhaps more foolish, than before. The previous attempts had taught them fear, but not respect. They thought of the mountain as an obstacle, something to conquer. Ethan, however, knew better. The mountain was not an enemy, it was a teacher, and he was its student and protector. The intruders moved cautiously along the eastern slope. From a distance, they looked like small, nervous shadows in the trees. Ethan adjusted his binoculars, noting their patterns and positions. There were 4 this time, better prepared, carrying new equipment and maps, confident that they could finally outsmart the terrain. He watched as they paused by a ridge. One of them gestured at the valley below, whispering, "We'll set up traps there. The animals have to come down sometime. It's only a matter of time." Ethan shook his head silently. They had learned nothing. Time was not their ally here. Patience, calculation, and observation were. And humans, when disciplined and clever, had a distinct advantage over recklessness. Ethan activated a small drone, sending it silently above the treetops. Its camera streamed live feed to his tablet. From this vantage point, he could see every step the poachers took. They were skilled enough to notice the drone, but not skilled enough to recognize it as an observation tool. To them, it was just another shadow moving in the trees. He smiled faintly. They were clever, yes, but he was cleverer. Years in the field had taught him that the mind was the most powerful weapon a human possessed. He did not need to strike directly. He only needed to guide the mountain, to create situations where their mistakes would teach them lessons far stronger than fear alone. The poachers set up a small camp near a stream, arguing quietly over traps. "We have to spread out," one said. "The last time whatever they were, found us. We can't make the same mistakes." Ethan noted their discussion carefully. They believed they were learning, but their understanding of the mountain was shallow. Every path they marked, every trap they placed, was already known to him. Every branch, stone, and slope had been mapped. Every error they might make had already been calculated. Over the next several days, Ethan began to apply his advantage. He did not confront them directly. Instead, he moved silently through the forest, adjusting small elements to disrupt their plans. A carefully placed rock would roll down a slope just as they approached. A snapped branch would create a noise that made them stop and look, losing valuable time. Traps they set would collapse harmlessly, teaching them frustration without harm. The poachers began noticing strange occurrences. Paths they had walked yesterday looked different today. Equipment disappeared or was mysteriously misplaced. Even the sounds of the mountain seemed to change. Branches moved when no one was near, and the wind carried whispers they could not explain. "This place is alive," one muttered during a tense moment. "I swear I heard something last night moving, watching us." The others nodded nervously. Fear was spreading faster than any physical threat, and Ethan knew this. Fear, when combined with intelligence and patience, could teach lessons stronger than brute force ever could. Ethan spent the nights observing, moving silently along the ridges, making careful adjustments to the terrain. He used his drone to monitor from above, ensuring no unexpected surprises occurred. The poachers' attempts to hunt were failing repeatedly. They became clumsier, more reckless, and more frightened. One day, as the sun rose over the peaks, Ethan noticed one of them trying to cross a narrow ridge. A simple placement of a loose rock caused him to slip slightly, startling him but causing no injury. The others rushed to help, but in their hurry, they triggered a small series of noise devices Ethan had set up earlier. Branches snapped, rocks tumbled, and the echoes made it sound as though the mountain itself were alive and moving. The poachers froze, their confidence crumbling. Ethan watched, binoculars in hand, appreciating the beauty of patience and calculation. Humans, he thought, could achieve incredible results without causing harm. By the second week, the poachers' morale had fallen sharply. They whispered constantly, paranoid and unsure of their surroundings. The forest, once merely trees and rocks, had become an unpredictable force in their minds. Every rustle, every shadow, Every distant bird call felt like a threat. Ethan decided it was time to show the human advantage more clearly. He carefully constructed a series of simple traps, not to injure, but to confound and guide. A fallen log here, a small barricade there, combined with strategic sounds, forced the poachers into predictable patterns. He could anticipate their moves, making it impossible for them to find the rare animals they sought. The poachers began splitting up, believing that separating would make them more efficient. This was exactly what Ethan expected. He monitored each one carefully. One wandered into a small ravine and found himself lost for hours, circling back to the same spot multiple times. Another approached a trap and triggered a harmless mechanism that left him stuck temporarily in a tangle of branches, panicking silently. Ethan's mind worked like a chessboard. Each poacher's move was a piece he could control, guiding them without direct confrontation. They were clever, yes, but humans, he realized, could outthink themselves. Strategy, observation, and patience were far more potent than weapons alone. By the third week, the poachers were exhausted. Sleep-deprived, frustrated, and confused, they began to argue. "We're wasting time," one hissed. "Maybe we should just leave." "No," another replied. "We came here for a reason. We'll find what we came for." Ethan observed quietly. Their stubbornness, combined with fear and exhaustion, made them predictable. Humans were remarkable in their creativity and cunning, but just as remarkable in their mistakes when under pressure. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountain peaks, Ethan activated a series of small drones he had stationed in trees along the main paths. They moved silently, casting shadows and emitting faint sounds. The poachers panicked, thinking the mountain itself was responding to them. Their equipment rattled, their calls became frantic, and one even stumbled into a shallow creek while fleeing a shadow. Ethan smiled behind his binoculars. This was the human advantage, the ability to understand, predict, and manipulate outcomes without causing harm. They were learning the hard way that intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking could outmatch strength and arrogance. By the end of the month, the poachers were barely functioning as a team. They were hungry, tired, and terrified. Every attempt to hunt failed. Every trap they set backfired, harmlessly but with effect. Every path they took seemed altered, confusing, and dangerous in ways they could not explain. Ethan spent his days reinforcing his observation points, adjusting his devices, and walking the mountain. He felt a quiet pride. The mountain was safe. The animals thrived, and the poachers were learning a lesson about respect, strategy, and human intelligence. He realized as he watched the sun rise over the misty peaks that this was what humans did best. They were not the fastest, not the strongest, and not the most enduring creatures, but they were patient, adaptable, and clever. When applied correctly, these traits could overcome almost any challenge, and the poachers were proof of it. Their arrogance, their reliance on brute strength, and their inability to anticipate the intelligence of a human mind were their downfall. Ethan Voss, the ex-sniper turned guardian of a mountain, had created a living classroom. Each misstep of the intruders taught them lessons that weapons never could, and he understood that this was only the beginning. Others would come, tempted by rumors of untouched wilderness and rare animals. But the mountain, guided by a disciplined human mind, would always have the advantage. As evening fell, Ethan stood on his balcony, looking over the quiet peaks. The mist curled around the trees, and the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. He felt a calm certainty. The mountain had chosen him as its protector, and he had proven that humans, when clever and patient, could dominate even the most cunning intruders without a single act of violence. The poachers had underestimated humans. They had learned that intelligence, observation, and strategy were far stronger than weapons or brute force. And Ethan, standing on the highest point of his mountain, understood that this human advantage would ensure the safety of his sanctuary for years to come. The mountain was alive, not with anger, not with threat, but with the quiet proof of human skill and patience. And at its center, Ethan Voss, a man who had seen the darkest parts of humanity and survived, remained the calm, watchful guardian. The intruders had returned, but they would not leave unchanged. They would carry the lesson of the mountain with them, that humans, disciplined and clever, could outthink, outlast, and protect with precision unmatched by any other force in the world. And that lesson, Ethan knew, would last far longer than fear alone. Ethan Voss had watched the mountain for weeks. Every tree, every rock, every animal path had been mapped in his mind. The poachers had returned, more determined than before, but also more fearful. They had learned that the mountain was not a place to conquer, it was a place to respect. Yet stubbornness and greed had drawn them back. Ethan prepared himself early one morning. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the faint chill of winter approaching. The sky was clear, revealing distant peaks that shimmered in the morning light. He adjusted the cameras and sensors along the ridge lines and checked the hidden drones that hovered silently above the trees. Every device, every observation point was working perfectly. The poachers appeared on the eastern slope around midday, moving cautiously. This time there were 5 of them, all carrying equipment designed to catch rare animals. They whispered among themselves, confident they had learned from past mistakes, but Ethan knew better. They were clever, yes, but not clever enough. He watched them through binoculars, noting every step, every glance. One paused to adjust a map, another checked a trap, and the rest moved forward slowly, scanning the terrain as if expecting danger at every turn. Ethan did not intervene immediately. He allowed them to make the first moves, to reveal their patterns and weaknesses. Humans, he thought, always exposed themselves when under pressure. Observation was his strength, patience his weapon. The poachers reached a small clearing near a stream. They began setting traps again, speaking in low tones. "We'll have better luck here," one said. "The animals have to pass through the stream." Ethan smiled faintly behind his binoculars. They still did not understand. The mountain was not predictable. Its guardian, however, was. He activated a few small devices hidden in the trees, a combination of lightweight barriers, noisemakers, and reflective signals. When the poachers approached, the branches shifted as if moved by unseen hands. Shadows danced across their paths and faint whistles echoed from the ridges. One poacher froze, staring around nervously. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. The others nodded, their confidence faltering. Fear, carefully planted, grew stronger with each small surprise. They began arguing quietly. "Maybe we should leave," one muttered. "No," another replied. "We came too far, we can't go back now." Ethan observed, noting the split in their morale. They had grown cautious, hesitant, but stubbornness still drove them forward. This would be their undoing, not force, but human nature itself. He began to guide their movements subtly. A fallen log here, a displaced branch there, forced them to take indirect paths. Small noise devices created illusions of movement in the forest. Shadows from reflective mirrors positioned above them mimicked the shape of a large predator. The poachers panicked, thinking they were being watched from every direction. Ethan did not confront them directly. He did not need to. Every mistake they made, every step they took into confusion, was teaching them a lesson about humility, strategy, and respect for the mountain. One poacher tried to cross a narrow ridge to check a trap. Ethan had rigged it earlier with a harmless mechanism, a small pulley system that caused leaves and dust to fall, startling him. The man stumbled slightly, eyes wide with fear. The others rushed to help, but in their hurry they triggered another minor obstacle, a harmless net of vines that trapped their legs temporarily, causing panic without injury. Ethan observed quietly, noting the poachers' reactions. They were learning, but the lesson was slow. Humans were clever, yes, but often stubborn and reckless. They required guidance to understand true strategy. By evening, the poachers had gathered near a ridge overlooking the valley. Their faces were pale, their bodies tense. They whispered urgently, planning their next move. "We've tried everything," one said. "Nothing works. This place, it's alive. Something's watching us." Ethan smiled behind his binoculars. Alive? No, the mountain was what it had always been. But in the hands of a skilled human, it became something more, a controlled force capable of outsmarting intruders without ever striking a blow. He spent the night reinforcing his preparations. Small devices were adjusted, paths subtly altered, and observation points were checked. Every potential move of the poachers had been considered and accounted for. By morning, he would begin the next stage. At dawn, Ethan activated a series of drones and reflective mirrors strategically placed along the ridges. The poachers, unaware, began their day. As they moved toward a trap they had set near a clearing, the devices worked as planned. Shadows and sounds created confusion, forcing them to change direction repeatedly. Every step was guided by Ethan's careful planning. One poacher tripped over a disguised root, stumbling into a small stream. Another was caught momentarily in a harmless tangle of vines. Panic spread silently among them. They argued quietly, frustration and fear rising in their voices. Ethan knew the moment was near. The poachers' confidence was shattered and their mistakes were now predictable. He activated a small, subtle light signal from a hidden mirror. It reflected across the trees, drawing their attention to a path that seemed safe. Naturally, they took it. The path, however, had been carefully prepared. Loose stones, harmless but startling obstacles, and small noisemakers ensured they moved slowly, carefully, and under constant psychological pressure. The mountain seemed alive, every shadow and sound suggesting unseen eyes. By midday, the poachers were exhausted. Hunger, fatigue, and fear had weakened their coordination. They tried to regroup, but confusion ruled their movements. Every path they took led them into minor obstacles, each one teaching a lesson about patience and observation. Ethan observed quietly from a ridge above. His eyes scanned the terrain, noting every reaction. This was human ingenuity at work. The poachers had relied on strength and basic planning, but they underestimated what a human mind, combined with careful observation and strategy, could achieve. By evening, the poachers gathered near a cliff, trying to find a way back to safer terrain. Their faces showed fear, frustration, and a dawning respect for the mountain and its unseen guardian. "We can't fight this," one muttered. It's everywhere, watching us." Ethan remained hidden, smiling faintly. They had finally begun to understand. This was not about weapons or strength. It was about intelligence, patience, and adaptability. Humans had an advantage in the world when they applied their minds carefully. The night fell, and the mountain returned to its quiet rhythm. Ethan remained on his balcony, observing the stars appear one by one in the sky. The poachers, now humbled and exhausted, had learned lessons no textbooks could teach. That nature was patient, strategic, and capable of turning even the cleverest intruders into students of respect. Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction. The mountain was safe. The animals thrived, and the poachers had learned humility, if not completely, at least enough to reconsider their actions. The human advantage, he realized, was not brute force. It was cleverness, patience, and the ability to adapt to situations others could not predict. He knew this was only the beginning. Others might come, tempted by rumors of untouched wilderness and rare animals. But the mountain, guided by a disciplined human mind, would always have the edge. As the stars shone over the peaks, Ethan understood a simple truth. Humans, when skilled and patient, could achieve control without violence. They could guide events, protect life, and outsmart threats in ways that brute strength could never match. The poachers had returned, thinking they could take what was not theirs. They would leave changed, aware that the human mind, when disciplined, could protect, guide, and outthink in ways few expected. And at the center of it all, Ethan Voss, the ex-sniper and mountain guardian, remained calm, watchful, and victorious, not through violence, but through the quiet, unstoppable power of human intelligence. The mountain was safe. Its guardian was patient. And any who dared enter without respect would soon discover that the human mind was its greatest defense. Ethan Voss stood on the balcony of his cabin, the cool morning air brushing against his face. The mist rose from the valleys, curling around the trees like silent fingers, and the sun peeked over the distant peaks, casting a soft golden glow across the mountain. For weeks, the intruders had tested him, testing his patience and skill. Now he knew the final act was approaching. The poachers had returned once more, undeterred by the failures of their predecessors. They were 5 in number, heavily equipped, and confident that this time they could conquer the mountain. Yet Ethan remained calm. He had prepared for every possibility. The mountain itself was now a part of him, every tree, rock, and stream memorized. He had learned its rhythms, and it had learned his careful, deliberate presence. From the cabin, Ethan monitored the poachers with his binoculars and the live feed from several drones positioned strategically across the mountain. Each device was subtle, nearly invisible to the naked eye, but powerful enough to give him complete awareness of their movements. He had even prepared minor obstacles that could guide the intruders without causing harm, ensuring that any lesson learned would come from cleverness, not danger. The poachers moved cautiously along the eastern ridge, whispering among themselves. "We know they're here," one said, glancing nervously at the tree line. "We just have to find them first." Ethan shook his head quietly. They were still thinking in terms of confrontation. That was their mistake. The mountain was not something to fight. It was something to understand, and the human mind, when disciplined and patient, could harness it. He activated a small series of sensors along the ridge. Branches moved slightly, stones shifted subtly, and faint sounds echoed across the valley. The poachers froze. Fear had returned, stronger than before, but now tempered by a strange curiosity. "What is this place?" one whispered. "It's like it knows we're here." Ethan smiled. The mountain did not know. He did. Every shadow, every sound, every subtle movement had been guided by him. The poachers were learning, slowly, that human intelligence, when applied with patience and discipline, could protect life and command respect without striking a single blow. As the day progressed, the poachers attempted to move deeper into the forest, searching for rare animals. Ethan, however, had anticipated every step. Loose rocks, harmless vines, and carefully positioned branches forced them along predictable paths. Small reflective devices cast misleading shadows, and drones overhead monitored their every move. By midday, frustration had set in. The poachers were tired, hungry, and increasingly aware that the mountain itself seemed alive. They spoke less, moving with caution, their arrogance slowly fading. Ethan decided it was time to guide them toward the final lesson. Using a combination of drones and subtle environmental adjustments, he led them to a large clearing near a stream. The clearing appeared peaceful, almost inviting, but every element had been carefully positioned to teach a lesson. Paths looped back on themselves, stones shifted underfoot to create harmless surprises, and sound devices mimicked movements that were not there. The poachers entered the clearing, exhausted and wary. One stepped on a hidden branch, causing a small cascade of leaves and twigs to fall around him. Startled, he stumbled, and the others quickly rushed to help. In their haste, they triggered another minor obstacle, a harmless tangle of vines that gently held their legs for a moment. Ethan observed quietly from a hidden ridge. Every reaction, every misstep, was a testament to the human advantage. Intelligence, patience, and observation could control outcomes in ways brute force never could. The poachers' fear was now mingled with respect. They understood, in a way words could not express, that this mountain was not theirs to claim. By late afternoon, The poachers began to gather near the stream, huddled and whispering urgently. Their faces showed fatigue, fear, and a dawning realization that they had been outmatched, not by weapons, not by numbers, but by human skill and strategy. "We've underestimated them," one admitted quietly. It's clever. It knows everything we do." "No," another replied. "It's not clever, it's human. There's a mind behind this, watching us." Ethan smiled faintly behind his binoculars. That was exactly the lesson he wanted them to learn. Humans, when patient and disciplined, had a distinct advantage. They could observe, adapt, and guide outcomes in ways no other force could match. The poachers were experiencing that advantage firsthand. As evening fell, Ethan activated a subtle final measure. He had prepared a narrow, winding path that would lead the poachers safely back toward the lower slopes, away from the protected areas of the mountain. Along this path, small visual cues suggested safety, guiding them naturally while teaching them the importance of careful observation and respect for their surroundings. The poachers followed the path, their movements cautious and deliberate. Every step reinforced the lesson. The mountain could be navigated safely, but only with intelligence, patience, and respect. Any attempt to force or rush would lead to confusion and frustration. By nightfall, the poachers had left the protected areas entirely. They had learned their lesson without injury, without confrontation, and without the mountain itself being harmed. Ethan watched them disappear into the darkness, their silhouettes shrinking until they were gone. He lowered his binoculars and exhaled. The mountain was quiet once more. Streams flowed, animals moved freely, and the forest settled into its natural rhythm. Ethan felt a deep satisfaction. The intruders had been humbled, but more importantly, they had learned something they would carry for the rest of their lives. Human skill, intelligence, and patience were more powerful than fear or brute force. Ethan spent the next few days walking the mountain, inspecting his devices and observing the wildlife. The deer grazed peacefully, birds built nests, and foxes prowled the underbrush without disturbance. The mountain thrived, protected not by violence but by discipline, observation, and human ingenuity. He realized that this was the true lesson of the mountain. Humans were not the strongest, not the fastest, and not the most enduring creatures. But when skill, patience, and intelligence were combined, humans could protect, guide, and outthink any challenge. That was the advantage no one else could match. Word of the intruders' failures began to spread quietly among the locals. Stories emerged of a ghost of the mountain, a guardian who watched without being seen, whose intelligence outmatched any who dared enter. Some dismissed it as rumor, others as superstition, but Ethan did not mind. The story would protect the mountain even further, reinforcing the lesson without his direct involvement. He spent the evenings on the balcony, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear night sky. The mountain stretched out before him, silent, peaceful, and alive in a way only he could understand. This was not just a sanctuary for animals. It was a testament to human capability, a reminder that intelligence, observation, and patience could protect what mattered most. Ethan reflected on his journey. He had come to the mountain seeking peace, away from the chaos of the world. He had found it, but he had also discovered something greater. Humans, when disciplined and clever, could become guardians of life in ways few imagined. The mountain had tested him, and in return he had guided it, protected it, and learned from it. He knew that others might come in the future, tempted by the beauty and resources of the mountain, but they would face the same lessons. The mountain, guided by a skilled human mind, would remain safe. Intruders would be observed, guided, and taught the importance of respect and intelligence. Ethan smiled faintly. The mountain had chosen its guardian, and he had accepted the responsibility. This was his legacy, not trophies, not wealth, but the knowledge that human skill and patience could protect life and preserve beauty in a world too often careless and destructive. As dawn approached, Ethan stood on the balcony one last time before resting. The first light of the sun glinted off the peaks, illuminating the streams and forests below. He felt a profound peace. The mountain thrived, the animals were safe, and the lessons had been taught without harm. The poachers had returned and learned the limits of arrogance. The mountain had survived, guided by intelligence and patience. And Ethan, its silent guardian, had proven that humans, when skilled and disciplined, could achieve what no weapon could: lasting protection through understanding and strategy. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. The mountain was alive, but this time it was alive with calm, quiet vigilance. Ethan knew that as long as he remained, the sanctuary would endure. And in that enduring silence he understood a simple truth: the greatest power a human could wield was not force but mind. Observation, patience, and strategy. The human advantage would protect the mountain, the animals, and the legacy of those who respected it for years to come. Ethan Voss, ex-sniper, mountain guardian, and master of patience and strategy, had ensured that the mountain would never again be threatened. The poachers had left changed, and the wilderness had been preserved. The mountain, once just land and trees, had become a testament to human ingenuity, a symbol of what patience, intelligence, and respect could achieve. And so the peaks remained, mist curling through the valleys, birds calling in the distance, streams flowing freely, and one man watching over it all: a quiet, vigilant guardian whose lessons would echo far longer than any shadow of fear or greed. The mountain was his. The animals were safe, and the human mind had triumphed not through strength but through wisdom.